There we go. Good morning, everyone. It's Wednesday, February 21st, and we are live again with the Dev Talk Show. Let's see. Hopefully, you heard some intro music there. We're still trying to figure out how to get some of the music to come through. But yeah, so it was a good bit of silent blank screen if you didn't have music, or a little bit of our typical theme as we come in. So my name is Rich Ross. As always, I'm joined by my friend and colleague here, Chris Gomez. Chris, I think you're on mute, sir.
Yeah, I was even ready to click it, and then I misclicked. So good morning, everybody. February 21st, huh?
Yeah. Winter's half over.
Yeah.
Which I'm okay with.
Yeah.
Hey,
it's
are
been
there people in the chat room?
Yeah, we
Welcome.
do.
Yeah.
It's been cold enough that some of the snow we got is kind of just turned to this ice sleet, and it's just waiting. It's waiting for some real sun to hit it, and then it'll be gone. But that's it. So like you said, it's stayed frozen a little. Well, I don't know. It's February. I guess it's not unusual.
Nah, it's kind of nice looking outside and seeing snow. It's still mostly white.
Right.
So good day, Lanky Scottish Nerd. Thank you for joining us. I recognize you from over on the C Sharp Fritz's show, and yep, the sun.
To be fair, we have clearly we don't always know everybody in chat, and not certainly asking for any personal information, but we might infer that perhaps this is a place on the globe that sees a lot less sun, like perhaps a Seattle, like in the U.S. That's often what is said about Seattle in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And we know other places where they see a lot less than perhaps in Southern California, which is where I grew up, and we saw a lot of sun and no snow. And not that I'm not grumbling about the snow. I've definitely gotten used to it, but
Scooter's not happy about the snow.
But yeah. So in any case, for folks joining us today, and you might be wondering what are we talking about? I'm not 100% sure what got switched on the different platform. Maybe you got in there. It's because a lot of times we tend to have a little topic there. And so I think it's really important that we know that sometimes these shows are an hour and that your time is valuable. And so if you're wondering what the heck are they talking about, and you're coming, especially in the future, you're watching from the future on YouTube, that today we have in our region, in the Philly region, a very popular user group, Philly.net. In fact, kind of before YouTube really took a big bite into live user groups. I mean, our user group's still going. We used to be at Penn State Abington with 1,100 people for that. That was just really, those are, I don't know that we'll ever get back to that, but those were some fun times. And so Philly.net Code Camp is coming up, and both Rich and I have talks planned. And part of what we, when you're going to build a talk like this, there's a lot of code to write and a lot of things to think about. And so there will be some shows where what you kind of see is really some beta testing of things that are going to be in the talk. Could be code, it could be ideas, maybe some slides. And the intent is for everybody in our audience to learn and also share your comments and what you know. And perhaps we would ask, hey, that's a really great thing. Can we incorporate it in the talk? So, I think that's kind of where we're going today. And I just say that mainly so that, folks aren't waiting 20 minutes and thinking, okay, what are we going to see specifically? Now we know. And so that's a great question. We got a good question. How do we spell Philly? And it's Philly.net is Philly. I mean, again, there could be people watching us internationally. We've actually had some comments from folks. There was a comment in the chat. I've mentioned this on the air before. There was a comment in the chat that said, hey, I don't remember the exact thing. Just said, hey, this is really great. I'm from Tashkent. And that's really kind of all it said. And so I unfortunately, it did not ring a bell to me where in the world Tashkent was. And so, I went to our friends on the web that have these search engines, and it's the capital of Uzbekistan. And I was just absolutely thrilled. So we know that people all over the world watch the show. So I never, I say, hey, I say something that's local vernacular instead of Philadelphia, right?
Mm-hmm. It happens. Yeah, we're I actually was filling out a spreadsheet for we're doing some kind of event, and I'm part of they call the place that I work at, the Philly MTC, or the Philadelphia MTC, and in the list of places I put Philly instead of spelling it all out, and they're like, well, where's that? So yeah, we tend to fall back to that here, but yeah, so I think what we're trying to do, and I dropped a link to the meetup for where this is going to be. The meetup is interesting if you're around the world, not necessarily for where coming out to some of the things that we have there. But what's really great is that we do have a lot of content that we wind up capturing during the session and then putting it up on the YouTube channel that they have. So it's a chance to see that content and be, even though you may not be able to participate live, certainly be able to go watch, provide comments, and give your thoughts around the presentations that are there. Lots of local people have started from that location, and that's how Chris and I kind of get started.
Well, look at this. Look at Rich Ross is here.
Oh wow!
Using containers for full feature development, and then look at, I recognize this gentleman too. Oh, and I don't mean Steve Sanderson. I was just playing his video back in the RC2 days of .NET 8, Blazor United. Yep. And so this is youtube.com/PhillyDotNet. We'll put that in the chat and so on. But then this is the meetup page, and I'm not sure. So tonight is Intro to Microsoft.NET Aspire with Bill Wolf. And that will, I believe, sometimes there are technical difficulties with recording, but usually the intention is we get it recorded, we get it up there. There were some technical difficulties with the Jeff Fritz talk in December that requires me to splice some of it together, and I just haven't done that yet. So,
coming, yeah, and I'm actually making some changes to the setup I have here in the office to make it easier to do the setup in the live stream upstairs. So I'm swapping out some of the higher end equipment that I have here and dropping back to some new webcams that I'm trying out, trying something a little different. So that should be fun.
Yeah. All right. So
90s kids watching Fresh Prince. Yes. And
look at that.
UK has a thing for Philly cheesesteaks. That's interesting. I think that was actually not that I do it that often, but it just happens to coincide. That was dinner last night. We made some homemade cheesesteaks using some local chipped beef and not chipped beef, chip steak. Sorry. And some really good rolls that were semolina seeded rolls, which were amazing.
I feel like Philly cheesesteaks are, like, for some people in the Philadelphia region, are a passion food, and it really isn't all that untrue that most people have their favorite place, and it's never the ones that you see on television travel shows.
Yeah.
When I've talked to anybody from the area, and I'm not saying they have to be from Philly either, just like the suburbs, or even as far out where I'm at, where I'm not really in the Philly suburbs, I'm halfway to Lancaster, so it's a ways. People still like, this is the place you have to go for. It's really interesting, and it's kind of neat because it is pretty good pub food. I would say probably fits right in.
Oh, definitely. You can.
Yeah.
So much most of the pubs around here have a really decent cheesesteak that would.
So to hear that the UK have it, that makes sense, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
I think those of us who probably out here, when you think of like the UK and the pubs, you think of fish and chips, maybe. So to think like, no, that would fit in. That would definitely fit in. So no, that's cool. That's great to hear that that comment there about lately the UK having a thing for Philly cheesesteak. So this code camp, it's a different tactic that Philly.net is taking. The traditional code camp was like going to a conference, a traditional conference where you might have maybe, 5 time slots in a day, perhaps. One might be at 9 a.m., say to 10:30, or maybe 9 to 10 or something like that. And you would go to session after session and learn about different things. And that was how the Philly.net code camps worked for many years, for well over a decade. And then, I don't know when it was, maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe even a little longer, there was an idea to add an extra day to have these longer, in fact, they were full day hands-on. Well, I don't want to say hands-on, but they were full day sessions focused on a topic, smaller groups. So often these sessions might, you might really have a round table of 15, 20. And the idea there was, just more focused attention on the topic, and especially even like if it was a hands-on lab type approach, which approach I would kind of go 8 hours for hands-on is a long time. So I would kind of go half and half, and you kind of get that individual help and all that stuff. So for this one, the approach is a morning session and an afternoon session. So instead of being an hour, we're looking at 3 hours. It's a deeper dive into a topic. I think you have the choice as the speaker if you want it to be a lab approach or not. And and we're each submitting topics. The one I'm submitting is to basically starting with it's ASP.NET Blazor. The idea being from the ground up, and what can we get done in 3 hours for somebody brand new to Blazor.
I will be honest. I think 3 hours is a lot to do and not have it be hands-on.
Right.
I think that's a lot, because then maybe you're whiteboarding, maybe it's an open discussion around something. But I mean, even still, that's a lot to kind of dig into and kind of carry on a conversation for that long around a topic without having a ton of PowerPoint slides and PowerPoint people to death, which is not what CodeCamp is about anyway.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I think having the ability to set things up and then spend the rest of the time just kind of digging in. And I think that's kind of how I'm thinking of approaching it. I know we're trying to do something along the lines of something with a generative AI kind of lab, where thinking about some of the custom uses of generative AI, not just talking to ChatGPT or the Bing chat and be able to ask it a question, but how can I provide my own data into that, right? So that I can shape the context of the response that comes back. And there's some patterns that are out there. They've been, available for quite some time. I think we initially started talking about them at Microsoft back at Build, with the RAG pattern, the retrieve, augment, and generate pattern of pulling data from some system and being able to find a small set of documents and send that over to generative AI to give a response based on what we've asked. So I think what we're going to do is kind of a take on that and be able to give people some hands-on experience with it, because I don't, we're still finding and talking to customer and to people that, for them, this is some of that stuff is just new to them. So
so
maybe even a little bit of use case discussion, right? Which is always interesting, right?
Yeah, and so what's interesting about, like you said, about the generative AI topic is that I think what might be definitely challenging is people coming to it are coming from so many different places. some might have very specific ideas about what they would like to do, and then others might just be there to say, I don't really even know. You know what I mean? And so is any of this related at all? Because I'm just going to ask if any of this related at all to the OpenAI studio or the OpenAI service, the Azure OpenAI service. That's what it's called, right?
Yeah, I mean that's what
Yeah.
it's called on the Azure side. That OpenAI has their
Well, they have their own
implementation of it, right? But
right.
I mean, you could, and that's because you could sign up for, if I understand right, you could sign up for I don't want to say production, but more than just the free service, right? There are things you can do where you can start to put in your own, build out your own capabilities there. So you could use that, or you could use the Azure stuff. I think the idea is, because it's code camp and you have people coming from different venues, and you might have, signing up for different free services or what have you, or have access to services from something else. We're trying to be a little liberal with, how we bring into that. So.
I think the only reason I brought up, and I should have probably been a little closer to ready, right? Is I believe, like you said, it doesn't have to be Azure OpenAI. There's the OpenAI SDK, and I'm not an expert on it, but I know that if you go, like there's a whole set of, not services, but you can get started there as well. But there is a whole set of labs on GitHub for Azure OpenAI that we have been looking at, because basically it looks like they might be fun to start and then maybe build on top of.
Yeah.
And I was trying to find, I haven't found the link yet though. So.
Oh, okay.
I think that it's an interesting topic to go in, because you could, the nice thing about having the lab is that somebody watching, you can point to them to some content, and then maybe what we do, I think, is you build on top of it to say, okay, so we started with the lab, but moved on to some of these other things.
Your situation's slightly different. It pivots a little bit. How can you go down that path if you use this as kind of like a starter, almost like that, that first file new project, right? And then take it in the direction you need it to go.
Okay, I found it.
Oh, cool.
So there we go. So this is it. This is on GitHub, Generative AI for Beginners.
Nice.
I remember reading recently this, where it says right here, version 2. I remember recently, I don't know if I saw a blog post or if it was on Twitter, I don't exactly remember, that it was saying, yes, this is what it says here. Currently being deployed, official release this Friday. So the last time I was here, this date, I don't recall seeing this date here. Okay. And basically what they're doing is right in front of us, updating it. And so if you start looking at it today, it's not that anything on it, I believe, is technically wrong. It's just that there may be a little bit of disjointedness of the things that are being added. But there's a whole series of lessons about setting up your development environment. Some of these lessons don't necessarily have code. In fact, I think it's correct that up until 6, it's mostly just understanding large language models, understanding prompt engineering, and then you can see it switches to build. Then you start switching to code. And in this particular case, this happens to be, I think that it's all surrounds. Oh, okay. No, it says right here. Here we go. Azure OpenAI service or OpenAI API, which is important because I believe with the OpenAI API, this is something that you can code and complete without the kind of investment that you need for OpenAI service, which is great for developers. It's always nice to to see something that we can use without, too much.
Right. I mean, the Azure OpenAI service, you can start, if you can get a free account, you can start to code inside of there. I think you get some amount of money free when you sign up for a free subscription.
Yeah, some credits and I don't know
Certain
what they
rates for
are.
the first month, yeah. And then there's some things that are free for the first year, and there are other services that are always free, right? So the ability to create the 10 free websites, right? You'll always have the ability to do that. And it's a whole. If you go to, I think it's azure.com/sign up, possibly something like that. I'll find the link and post it in the chat. But the idea is that you could, that's how you can essentially get started. Oh, there you go.
It was azure.com/sign up to get there. And then what's nice is that you can click on try for free.
Yep.
And this is where you get the information you're looking for.
Right.
Which is some services are free for 12 months. Some are always free, $200 of Azure credit to use in the first 30 days. And so on. So in any case, but yeah, there's like some always free services. Like I believe some, you mentioned it, that Azure App Service, you can have 10 of the free tier, and Azure Functions, your first million requests. And then I think there's even a free tier of Azure SQL Database. I just don't remember what it is.
Yep.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually, it's in that section you were looking at. Take advantage of
Oh, it's just telling you.
Go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Telling you 32 gigs of storage.
Some say always, some say 12 months.
Yeah, right. So, oh, you're right. It says always. Look at that. I never noticed the always before. So, yeah, pretty neat stuff. So no, I'm really interested in this generative AI for beginners. Definitely something I want to look at in the future.
Definitely recommend it. I mean, that level setting is really important. There's a number of times where we started a conversation with the customer, and we kind of have to drop back and check all the language, make sure we're all kind of on the same page with what everything is. Even reaffirming some of the concepts around what's going on there, and your data and all of those kind of conversations. So having that foundation for those first 5 or 6 labs that they got there is like super important. Don't skip those.
So when it comes to Blazor, I if you just I believe the way I got here was just blazor.net. I'm going to try it real quick. So yes, just blazor.net. That was it. Oh, and it didn't actually present. So let's switch that back over
here. There we go.
So just plain old blazor.net redirects you to what is essentially the Blazor docs. But the first page is kind of like, it's the brochure. Mm-hmm. And then you can either click get started and go straight to, is this a learn? I think this is a learn. Oh, it's not. This doesn't look like it's directly through learn, like, where you get the experience and the credits and all that.
All the points.
Well, not credits, but the little medals. But it is basically running through and helping you get going for the first time on Windows, Linux, or Mac, which is kind of nice. I remember years ago, the sample app, one of the classic sample apps was Blazing Pizza.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this. Yeah.
That's it there, isn't it?
Yeah, this is it. I switched over to it. This is now on GitHub. So I switched very quickly to a GitHub repository, Blazor Workshop. And what I do not know is I do not know if it has been updated for .NET 8. There is a pull request here that says upgrade to .NET 6. So that's possible. I suppose if I drop into source, I wasn't sure if I'd see a global JSON. I don't see one, but there is a solution file. So, yeah, I guess, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see this updated, maybe to take advantage of render modes, because I don't believe it does today. Although, I'd have to bring the code down and double check.
Right.
I guess if we go to the CS proj, we'll see. I thought I would see. Oh no, look at that version. Blazor version is a variable here.
Huh.
That's not something that I've actually done a whole lot of. And then there's an editor config, which is not, we haven't explored editor config too much. But you can, there's some things that I've seen teams where I work talking about what Visual Studio will do when you have it format your code in C# and you do that Control K D and it formats your code.
Yeah.
And that's configurable. I don't know how deeply configurable, but nonetheless, I was hoping to see if I could figure out what version of Blazor this was running on, but I think I'll have to leave that for another time. So I part of me has been thinking to take a look and see where this is.
Okay.
But I want to make sure that the workshop I do is .NET 8. So it might mean some updating. I don't know. But it's nice to be able to get to an app that's a little more full featured. So, for example, I think you can you can pick any one of these sessions, and I'm pretty sure that there's there's these save points in here that you can use to kind of basically start there.
Okay.
But
so
it also
it up to that point, and you just
yeah
go off and okay.
Yeah, and so it's interesting to see how they approach this. Certainly, components was an important section, and state management is an interesting topic as well. There is some talk about authentication and some JavaScript interop, which is something I've hardly touched.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's because it's not important. It's just never come up on our show, really.
That's true. So Blazor's kind of a big topic, and we only have 3 hours for the presentation.
Right.
Are you thinking of diving into just authentication, just WebAssembly, just state management? Because I mean, you could easily spend 3 hours and provide some awesome hands-on lab conversation to people around any one of those topics.
Yeah. So I think the guide for me is the overarching question that I ask myself is, okay, if I go, I don't care if it's Visual Studio or the .NET command line, the CLI, and I create a new Blazor project with .NET 8, what are the first things that are going to jump out at me as because the question is now, what do I do now? That's always what happens. Is what do I do now?
Right.
What is going to jump out at me? And so I think we've covered a lot of this on the show. Some of the things that are going to jump out at me are these choices that I have to make up front. How do they affect the final product? We've done a whole show on this. It was a show called Starting New Projects. We did it during RC2. And it was when I basically just said, okay, we'll use the Visual Studio GUI as an example, only because you can do all this at command line though. And you just pick the different options and you're going to get this same experience. It's just without being walked through it. But if I say new project and I pick Blazor Web App, which is the kind of the new, you do it all from here.
Yep.
We do have a Blazor WebAssembly standalone app template for folks who say, I have a use case that's WebAssembly only. To me, that use case usually means you might want a PWA experience, offline support. I'm not connected to the internet. My app still works. If you want that kind of support, then this template, you're not going to need the rest of it, because once you've decided to buy in to offline support, then you really got to concentrate on Blazor WebAssembly to be your client on device, spa-like support for when the app is not connected.
Yeah.
But if you just pick Blazor Web App, you get asked some questions. And, oh, look, Blazor Web App 7. So I must have done this in a while. Now, what's frustrating, I think, as a developer sometimes, and things are way better than they used to be, but if you've been with Visual Studio a long time, there have been times when you've done a file new project wizard, and it didn't even have to be ASP.NET, it could be any technology, and you start getting asked all these questions that you just have no idea the answer to. And so that could be frustrating. So here, in Blazor web app, you get asked this framework question, but you can't pick anything other than .NET 8 anyway. And that's because prior to .NET 8, we didn't have the ability to join or to have the different render modes in one app. In fact, the term render modes came about in .NET 8 because prior you made a choice. I am hosting on Blazor server. I'm hosting on Blazor WebAssembly. Well, the host is a different thing, but that's the runtime I'm choosing. You had to make that decision.
Yep.
And so, you get asked, do you want configure for HTTPS? Do you want authentication? And I think maybe early on, you leave that off to just say, hey, let's just concentrate on components. We'll come back to authentication maybe in the last half hour.
Yeah.
We've dug into it. It's a lot. There's a lot to it. Yeah. And then what render mode do you want? And, it's the naming. Naming is hard. The difference between these choices, none, server, WebAssembly, and auto, they're distinct choices that you're making decisions about how do you want this thing to operate, at least after the project template is rendered or created for you. And what's weird is that, so Blazor, besides having the SignalR based interactivity that we call Blazor server, where a SignalR connection, essentially likely a WebSocket, is doing the render updates that you would normally associate with a SPA app calling an HTTP API, getting an answer back and rendering. Blazor server is doing that for you, but it's doing it in a different way, where it calls to the server just like you would call a web API. And then it says, hey, here's the update you need to make to the page. That's Blazor server, which is not the same thing as server-side rendering. Server-side rendering is just a feature of Blazor where your page is first rendered in HTML. CSS is all rendered on the server and delivered first time. So, but that's none. If you want it's not that server-side rendering isn't in the other models. It's that if you don't want any interactivity, no WebAssembly, this isn't a SPA app, then the choice is none. So going over those render modes is big because this drop down means something.
Right.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you can't change your mind. It's just you really got to kind of understand what you're doing and how all those choices interrelate.
Yeah.
If you want to augment it later on.
And I would like to actually, I don't know how hands-on this would be, but I would like, because we've dove so much into it, I would like to at least have people go home with, okay, here is how you make those shifts, either because you've already decided you want different things in different places, I want different interactivity and different options, or as your web application grows up, you need more. How do you do it so that people don't feel like, oh, I'm going to have to start a whole new project and port the code over? You don't have to. So we've even dove in. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that could be an interesting discussion, and let people see that and see hands-on. Hey, we chose none. I think none was the first option there, right?
Yeah,
no, not none.
Right. It was none. Okay. Although I think this might be the default one. I'm not sure though.
Auto for both?
Let's see. And to be fair, I'm not 100% sure if Visual Studio or whatever these, I don't know if this remembers. So when I click next here, I'm seeing these are the defaults. I'm pretty sure that these are the defaults. So yes, auto comes up. I mean, if it doesn't come up for you, that's a different.
I'm pulling up on my side because I don't think I've done a file new project on this new machine.
I suppose one way to look at it is, what are the defaults in .NET, right? So here we are at the .NET SDK. And as you can see, I have a bunch of SDKs on my machine, some of which I need to remove. We keep talking about using the .NET uninstall tool to do that.
Right.
And if I say new, I don't even think I think it's new list, or maybe it's a switch now. It'll tell me because I think it's being deprecated. One way is being deprecated. I don't remember which way it is. It didn't say anything, so this must be right. So these templates matched your input.
Mm-hmm.
And if what's it called? It's just called Blazor. Blazor web app is just Blazor.
Sure.
So if I say .NET new Blazor, whoops. Well, I guess I probably don't want to. I've made a mess of this screen. So .NET new Blazor, and then I think if I say help, here's where we get the defaults from the command line. So for example, the authentication choice, the default is none. The interactivity choice, the default is server.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's what I see in Visual Studio, the latest version when I open that up.
So I'm not unconvinced that this remembers my last choices. So for me to come here and say this is the default, I don't know that that's really correct. The global, where's global? Let's see. I think this could be the all interactive setting. I think so. Yeah. So they'd use the term interactivity location, global or per page. And it looks like that's what they're doing here. Configures whether, so that looks like this option, all interactive. So.
And default false, which would mean it's per page.
Right.
Okay.
Per page, per component.
Yep.
And I think that I could probably have a slide that basically says like, hey, here are the choices. Here's what they are in the CLI. And then I think what you do is you go through and you show people, here's what they do. Right. And we've seen on this show what they do in the global world is they go and they put the render mode, whether you've chosen server, auto, WebAssembly, they put the render mode way up at the routing level, way up at the app level, so that it's cascading down to all the components past it. I think they kind of make an assumption, which isn't totally wrong, that, well, in our template, the router is above everything, so let's put it there. And if for some reason you chose not to use the router template, well, then that wouldn't work for you anymore. You'd have to find the top level of your application. And then if you do the exact same thing, you go file new project, but you say per page, then you see that it's sprinkled everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that I would actually want to start these up. I think maybe instead this could be a slide-driven part for no other reason than it's just faster.
Right.
This isn't so much about trying to hide it from people or saying, don't go explore this yourself. You absolutely should. In fact, here are the command lines. Here's what you do. Here are the exact choices. But instead of doing like what I'm going to do right now, so let's say I've picked .NET 8, authentication type none, global interactivity, and I'm going to say Blazor server, which was the default we saw over there. And I say create. Well, now we're sitting here waiting. And then this comes up, and then we got to go find the different things. I feel like let's just go to the slide and find it.
Right.
Like what has happened now that I've made those choices. And we know, because on this show we've done this so many times, we know that we can expect to see Blazor server there and Blazor server there. So we know that. Mm-hmm. And so then the lesson to somebody watching for the first time is that you want to add WebAssembly later. This is the place to add it, here and here. You head over to routes.razor. And maybe it wasn't routes.razor. Maybe it is app.razor. Here we go. You head over to app.razor, where this is the index HTML, so to speak, of your app. So it's as high as you can get in the chain of Blazor components. And we are putting interactive server here, and we're putting interactive server here. And then because we said global, that's where it gets put, and it cascades down to every page that is rendered by the router and every what's the name of the tag? We'll go see what it is. There's a component that renders information here, and it's picked up by head outlet.
Okay.
So that's also got to be server. All I have to do is go to a page, right? And we'll see it. Page title. Page title gets picked up by the head outlet component. It even says that in the, I appreciate that it said that in the IntelliSense. Enables rendering HTML title to a head outlet component. So if you've ever wondered, we should do a show on this. If you've ever wondered how Blazor components decide what they're routing to, you go look at the page title component source code.
Huh.
And you see, because look, page title is going to head outlet, not, how does this get picked up compared to the rest of it? Is it rendering in the body? Yeah. So Blazor has a way to render to the body. Blazor has a way to render to the head. I'm actually not sure if it's even more powerful than that. It might be. I just don't know.
Honestly, I think, the path you're heading down here would be a really, really interesting talk. I think there would be a lot of folks would be interested in this kind of a level conversation around Blazor, because it is the file new project, but it gets past that in so many ways.
Yeah, and I think again, I wouldn't want to dwell on it because you only have 3 hours.
Right.
But I think a level setting to start off of what the heck, it's the question I ask myself all the time whenever I create a new solution like this, as I go, so what do I have now?
Right.
What have I been left with? And there have been various times in my developer career focused almost entirely, but not completely, on Microsoft technologies, whether it was a VB6 template or an MFC template, for goodness sake, C++, or was I creating a new service, maybe using ATL? Like, wow, where you finish the file new project and you're just like, now what?
Mm-hmm.
Now what do I do? And that's how I felt when I picked individual accounts for the first time.
Sure.
And we have a couple shows where we have broken this down. We've got more to do. Mm-hmm. But when we broke this down and I opened up account and I said, oh my goodness, look at all this code that was not in the previous solution. So what is it?
Yep.
And we started breaking it down. There's a couple previous shows where we've done that. So I feel like the file new project breakdown, I hope, is not more than a half an hour. Certainly people could ask questions throughout the day, mm-hmm. but I feel like you got to have time to get into components.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's a lot of what Blazor is. You got to be able to hit on that.
Right. And if there's anything that I might criticize that I would criticize in the sample, although I understand how hard it is to make a new project template. You're solving many problems at once. And I even believe Damien Edwards has talked about this, although I hate to put words in his mouth, so I'm not attributing this to him. He just basically said that they used to not put a whole lot of thought into it. And then what they found out, and I don't know if they found this out through metrics, conversations, I don't remember, is people use these as the basis for what ships. And that's not a new problem.
Right.
We could go back to early .NET days. You make a new WinForms app, the percentage of code that stays intact is probably extremely high, 90%. People just start building. So I think what they discovered is that what you ship in this scenario not only should be shippable, it should be production ready, or at least it needs to be close to it. And if not, they really got to tell you where it's not. It also needs to be secure.
Right.
That's a huge concern. And it should demonstrate some good practices.
Yeah.
And what this solution does not do is it only demonstrates page components. So the counter component is in the page. and what it does is in the page. I don't know that this would be super helpful because the counter is so basic, but it might have been interesting for the counter to be a separate component and then it's consumed in a page component. Regardless, that's got to be covered. We have to talk about that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, because if you're trying to break, at least that's how the couple apps that I've written so far. That's how I break it down in my mind, right? What's the page? What's the different layers, right? There's the page layer. Okay, well, what's in there? And then there's there's this piece that in the one app I was building that asks questions. Okay, well, each question is a component, and I could basically pull them together as a collection of questions, and then some image gets generated. Well, that's a separate component. And maybe I don't think that's breaking it down too far. Like, yes, all of that could live in the same page, but I don't think that structure is what the intent of a Blazor or what the architecture of a Blazor application should be. And maybe I'm wrong. I haven't done enough of them to get to get my fingers cut by doing some of that. But that's at least how I approach it. Now, interesting to hear what your thoughts are, because you dug a bit deeper into those kind of conversations.
It's hard to give one size fits all advice.
Yep.
And then it's also hard to not sound wishy-washy. So I think that the reality is, if you've decided you like Blazor for what you're doing, then there are probably many apps in this world that you could build and get value out of at work that are really just implementations of code on a page. You might think very page centric about what it is your little app's going to do. I shouldn't say little. It could be a big app too. Sure. But maybe it's some internal tooling. And you say, so you come to this page, and when you come to this page, you put in a specific serial number, and we go and look up in our database what that matches to, and you get a readout. And this is internal. It's got to you want a good experience for your support personnel so that they're efficient in what they do. But at the same time, we're not talking about something bulletproof for a customer coming from who knows where that you're trying to give good information to. It's somebody who's a little bit a higher level of training. They're internal. They understand the specifics. Maybe that's just a page with a nice little box to put the information in. Another place, a place that you're going to render readout. You just throw the code into the code block, and you call it a day, and you ship it.
Yeah.
And before anybody says like, well, that's terrible code, who wants to maintain that? You always have to scale what you do to the need. I think it's super important before you go around gold plating a wonderful solution. You got to ask yourself, is this as far as this tool will go?
Sure.
It might be. Maybe it becomes the most popular tool in the company, which has happened. And I think everyone maybe either has a story or has heard their manager bemoan the story about the little Excel spreadsheet or the little Access app that became the most important thing. And then they complain about it and they say, well, see, now this Excel spreadsheet got turned over us and we got to productize it. I say, we should celebrate that, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah.
We should absolutely celebrate when that happens, right? Like little app, a term of endearment, not a reference to size. I use it all the time. Absolutely, right?
Yep, that's awesome.
We should celebrate when Excel accomplished something for us. We should celebrate. I mean, maybe we shouldn't use Access as much anymore. But there was a time when there was kind of this scourge of somebody got a hold of Access and built something that became mission critical. And then IT complains about it. The dev group complains about it. And it's like, well, I don't know. Where were you folks?
Right. I mean, it's kind of nice that, you always, that's kind of the beauty of where that goes, and that citizen developer kind of comment of, well, it's gotten past the point of just being a quote unquote citizen developer app. We got to make it more enterprise-like, but you kind of already have your requirements and your proof of concept right there. It should be, as a developer and as an IT team, should be pretty straightforward to kind of re-architect that and rebuild it in an enterprise service of choice if that's where it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned the whole citizen developer terminology. I mean, when we look at Power Apps, Power Automate, things that have been, and frankly, still Excel, I believe it's true that it's either coming or it's happened, like Excel getting Python support. It's either coming, it's happened.
It is
I don't know.
I've heard it's coming. I have not heard a GA or a preview for that.
Yeah. So but I'm almost positive that that's happening. Excel Python integration. Yeah, get started with Python and Excel, right? Look at this. So maybe here we go. Excel currently in preview. So wouldn't that be something to try out, right? Because yes, I've done some. I would never consider myself an Excel wizard that could win these Excel World Championships that I've actually seen recently. Some YouTube videos came up. I would never be that, but like I did manage to create in Excel a fantasy football draft helper for myself, where if I cut and paste like the top 200 from ESPN.com's HTML, I could kind of scrape it into there enough into a sheet so that then all the other sheets would just lit up, and it would basically give me a readout of if I could, every player in the draft as they were drafted, I could pick which manager drafted them. Then another sheet was building the teams. Sure. And then I had a sheet for myself so that I could look at it and make sure that I hadn't drafted 6 players with the same bye week. Right. Nice. And it would even, I was learning how to do all this stuff. It would even like turn red if I reached one of my own danger criteria of like 4 players from the same team, 4 players for the same bye week, because you say to yourself, do I really want to overload on one offense? Like, what if they have a bad day? But then you go look at the team and you say, oh, well, it's the highest scoring offense in the league, so I don't care. Like, I'm fine that I've overloaded there. Good. Yeah. But yeah, and all of this was powered by a series of Excel sheets. So I had to learn things like how formulas can reference cells on other pages, which I knew you could do these things. I just never did them.
Right.
And that same kind of thing can happen in a Blazor app where you know that there's a whole universe of things you can do, but you may not have to get around to it for the app you're doing. It might be fine to just page components. But I think we should dive not, after the file new project experience, I guess, and it might be funny. Maybe I even kind of call it that as a gag, is that then it's the deep dive into components, page components, and and then I think state. I feel like those things are huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree.
You had a whole issue with state, and we looked around for what are the best practices people are doing, and it looks like some of them, I don't want to say that some of them feel like, oh wow, you inject a service to kind of get state. Okay. But then other ones were, what about what's built into Blazor with cascading parameters and things like that? How does that stuff work?
Right.
So
yeah, I know. I think it was on a show that Jeff did with Carl Franklin.
Yep.
And he actually has a framework of that can handle state inside of Blazor.
Right. So that has become a topic of conversation recently for Carl, to the point that he and Jeff collaborated. I have not gotten to watch that stream, because watching Jeff's streams, it's a longer, I got to say, okay, I got to put some time in, because these are, Jeff streams, or Jeff Fritz, C# Fritz. They could be 3-4 hours, and where the gem is going to be, I don't know. So, and it's not his fault. No, if anything, it might be interesting. Awesome. If he had a producer that was like chaptering, that might be interesting. I'm not trying to say Jeff should run and do that. Everybody should be watching C# Fritz if you're especially into Blazor right now.
Wow.
But
so that's a whole week's worth of commuting for me. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. But you're right that this became a big topic of conversation. I'm trying to figure out. I think. Let's see. I don't know if this is going to start playing. It might. Oh, it did. Look, there it goes. So I'm not sure if that goes out over the interwebs, but it might. So Carl did a whole show on app state in Blazor.net 8 and talked about how out of the box, some of the features that you might expect to work a certain way don't work the way you think. So part of what this episode talks about is both, here's the thing that will surprise you, in his opinion, and I think he's probably right, but I haven't dove deep into it yet. And then here's what I do to get around it. I'm pretty sure that's all in this episode.
Okay.
There are previous episodes of his Blazor train, which is hosted by DevExpress on the DevExpress YouTube channel. There are previous episodes where I think it might be discussed a little bit more. It could be this right here, application state. It talks about it, I think, a little bit. But then this is where I think he goes into, okay, here's the approach that I believe I'm going to go with. If I remember correctly, I think Rocky Laka joined him to discuss it. Yeah, so
he's doing something to include it in his CSLA.
Yeah, the CSLA framework, which I'm embarrassed to say I've never explored. That feels like something that maybe is being forgotten about.
Yeah, because there were some. It was a bit of a, well, I haven't explored it much either. I think I thought it was kind of an abstraction layer, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that, but
yeah, and I think it's one of those things that maybe should be looked at a little bit more, but and it just makes you wonder, like, how many people don't even know about it, right?
Right.
So let me see if I can find it. Is it? Yeah, here, I think this is it on GitHub. CLSA.net, right?
Yeah.
What I couldn't confirm for sure. Okay, so here's Rocky, the creator of the widely used CLSA.net open source framework. So there you go. And I didn't know that this was being held in a organizational repo. I just didn't know that.
Oh, okay.
But now I know. CLSA.net is a software development framework that helps you build a reusable, maintainable, object-oriented business layer for your app. Makes sense. The stuff that's not in file new project, right?
Sure.
Because most of the file new project in any web framework or desktop framework, it's concentrating on UI concerns.
True.
And how many of us rail against mixing the business logic and the UI concerns? Oh, you got to have a clean separation. I mean, Steve Smith has been talking about clean architecture and this kind of separation. I mean, he's even got some new courses that I think are available. I fortunately don't have the links. Maybe we'll have to find those. So like here, he's been preaching that for a long time. And there's some other folks too, who talk about, and I'm not trying to say there's the clean architecture. I believe it's a framework, but that's not necessarily saying it's the only way, but it is the idea of having a clean separation of concerns in your app. I boil that down to a different test, if you're wondering.
Okay.
This is going to sound a little, I mean, I don't know what people think. Tell us what you think in the comments. I think that I know that my business logic is well separated if I can add a new project to the solution that's a console app and build a CLI that does all the same stuff. So maybe no one ever wants to use it because it's too painful to use your CLI to do all these different things when it's really nice to have the nice GUI where maybe there's a great drop down and a grid and all this stuff. But what if I can make a console app that just spits out the contents of the grid? I don't care if it's usable. That's not important to me. It's that this app can go call the business components, get the same answers from parameters from the command line, and display them. That tells me that I have a good separation of the business logic.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
And then it turns out the bonus, if you do that and maintain it, The bonus is inevitably when somebody in the enterprise comes along and says, we'd love to use what you're doing there. We wish we could automate it. And so we started looking at Selenium to automate it. We started looking at this other thing to automate it, this Phantom web. You say, no, you don't have to do it. There's a CLI. And they go, what? You say, yeah, there's a CLI. It does everything. I'm not trying to tell you it's great, but you're planning to automate it. So what do you care?
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I've never accomplished that, like with a big enterprise product that I might work on, but I've certainly pushed for it a little bit, even with like the team, some of the teams that I work with, or some of the people that I talk to, is I've said, like, yeah, don't hesitate to build a CLI. Might seem like, why am I doing this? And it's like, well, you're proving a few things.
Yeah. That's an interesting thought. I like that.
I don't know that it's a fully formed thought, but it's a place that I've gone. It's a place that I've gone recently. So, like we said, I don't think the whole agenda will be done today. We know components is in there. I'm certain authentication and authorization, which I'm trying very hard to make sure that I always point out the difference, because I think, unfortunately, for a lot of us, it is way too easy to think of these as the same, and they're just not. And in fact, we could do a show on that too. That would be cool.
Yeah, that'd be fun, because there's different patterns and different technologies and things that can be brought to bear when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think for example, we should have a show where we set up the authentication pieces, which could be authentication using Azure services. I don't know if it's still called B2C. So
I believe it was rebranded to Entra.
Is it Entra ID?
ID?
Oh, Entra Internal ID. Okay. So authenticate, or many people are familiar with identity server in the .NET space.
Yep.
But then there's also identity providers out there in the world. In the end, they're all providing you authentication.
Yep.
You are trusting them that when someone shows up with a bearer token from them, you're going to trust that, like, they're the bouncer at the door. They checked your ID.
Yeah. And there are standards with which all of those interrupt, so that the identity providers are all the same, and we know how to what's in those tokens that we get.
But in the end, authorization is the responsibility of your app.
Sure.
Now, you can abstract that out into an API gateway. That's fine. But at the very core, in the end, no one is responsible for authorization than your app, not even that bouncer. The bouncer is just saying, I don't know if the analogy is exactly right, but the bouncer is just saying you're allowed to go in. It is still the authorization to do something. Perhaps it's to go into the manager's office. You got to be on a list of, it's my job as the authorizer to say, well, I trust the authentication that you're Rich Ross. I trust that. Mm-hmm. Is Rich Ross on my list of people who can go in the manager's office? He is, so I'm going to authorize it. Otherwise, it's like, look, you're authenticated, but you still can't come in here.
Right.
And there's the classic example of the DMV as the authenticator, but the server at the restaurant is the authorizer, and they look at your claim on the driver's license of your age. They say, well, does that claim meet my requirement? Does it meet my requirement to serve you an alcoholic beverage? It does or it doesn't. So you're either forbidden or will complete the request, right?
Doesn't mean you can't be in the restaurant. It just means you can't have
a
drink.
Right. Or even, the reason this all works is because we trust, well, whether it works or not is a different, but we trust that identification came from a source whose claims we believe.
Yeah.
So that's what authentication is providing the identity, sometimes wrapped up in claims. Older versions maybe were role-based. Doesn't really matter. You can write whatever policy you want. You can say you got to have this claim, and it has to be Tuesday after 8:00. Yeah. But you're like, well, what does that have to do with the authentication? Nothing. We just don't open the safe until Tuesday at 8:00. That's the only time we do it. So the the authorization policy says you're here, and I would have let you in, but it's 7:30, so can't come in. And I feel like there's a show there that we haven't done.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
But the reason why these 4 things stick out to me in a 3-hour Blazor experience is that I feel like they're the things that you'll hit as a new developer. And I don't want to dwell on the what is Blazor. For the code camp, it's the idea is we're going to learn through coding. And the file new project experience of like, what have you given me, team? But then build your app with components. First thing going to come out of everybody's mouth is how do I manage state? Yeah. I actually think the next thing that's going to come out of everybody's mouth, frankly, and I can't believe that I left this out, is the discussion on render modes.
Yeah.
Like, this is a whole new world for Blazor where it's not server WebAssembly anymore. You made this choice at the beginning of your project, and without a lot of surgery, you were essentially stuck with it. It's not that anymore. Then, building good components. And now I feel like we're starting to get to the 2.5 hour mark just with these bullet points. And that's including like a nice break and letting people explore and do some things.
Yeah.
And then I think you have to have the authentication conversation because, well, maybe not only, somebody who hits file new project and they go to, they go right here and they pick individual accounts. The next thing out of their mouth is what have I done?
Mm-hmm.
What have I done? And what do I have to do to get to production ready?
Yeah.
We got a great question in a comment. Sorry, Rich. We got a great question in a comment about somebody saying, I want to use external accounts, but I don't want there to be that choice with the buttons. And I was like, wow, what an interesting idea.
Yeah. How do you handle that?
Yeah. They say, like, I only have one authentication provider. I don't really want a button. I don't want it to be like, oh, click here. It might be unavoidable to have a sign-in button. And the reason I say that is because your authentication provider might have that process where they say, like, so hold on, the TheDevTalkShow's website is asking if they can use your identity. And then you say yes. Like, that part might be unavoidable. But from that point on, could it just try it? And that would be modifying the what are we modifying? The external login picker. Yeah. You would have to take over this code and own it in a way a little bit more than right now, where you can kind of just go along for the ride if you're willing to accept. Oh, I'll take Google and I'll take Microsoft and I'll take Facebook. So, anyways, we got to stand up, didn't we?
What's that?
We got to stand up, didn't we?
Yeah, we kind of got the time here.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, a lot of good stuff there. I think it's going to be. Look forward to maybe refining some of it, showing some of it on the walking through some of it on the stream here as we get close to Code Camp.
Yeah.
That would be definitely good to see.
No better place to beta test it, right?
Exactly. Cool. All right.
Got a good point here. I wish we could go more into this, but it is 9. People have meetings and calls to run to. And we thank you for joining us before morning stand-up, Rich. So I really appreciate it. We got to chat today.
Yeah, same here. It was good to catch up. Thank you, everybody in the chat, for hanging out with us and giving us some thoughts and comments as we went through this. And you don't have a meeting tomorrow, so maybe we can do a little bit of a content tomorrow. That'd be fun. But until then, hopefully this was helpful. If you see, we'd love to hear your comments if you're watching this in the future on the video. But other than that, for Chris Gomez, my name is Rich Ross, and we will see you all next time on the Dev Talk Show.